In this video, we're returning to the problem we've been talking about for the last 3 videos, but in a way that I think is much more relevant to the average program that's going to be written by the average programmer. Not that any of us are average. But once again, I'm talking about the UI and threads, and that the main thread that creates the controls in the window has what's known as the window handle, and that allows it to make changes to the controls and do all kinds of manipulations. But spawn threads from the main thread don't have access to the window handle and can't change the controls. But quite often in a spawn thread you do want to change the controls. So in this program, or 2 programs really, I show a solution to that problem of accessing the window controls from a spawn thread. And as with C# Edge 67 ComWin 4 and C# Edge 68 ComWin 5, I first present the problem and show how you can't change controls from a spawn thread, and then I present a solution to the problem. Once again, we're using a form with a list box and a button, and this time the form, the list box, and the button were all generated in the IDE, and we have the standard code behind the form. And what you might not realize is that as soon as you get the standard code behind the form, you also get a thread, because anytime you're executing code, you execute it in a thread within a process. So if we look at the event handler for the button, I'm essentially spawning a new thread, and before I spawn the thread I have a message box that says in button click pre-thread, and then after I spawn the thread and I start it with the start and I wait for it to finish with a join, I have another message box that says in button click post thread. And then currently all I have in the thread, which is specified by the thread function I pass when I instantiate the thread, is a message box that says in thread function. So if we compile and run this and I push the push me, you see the button, the message box pops up that says pre-thread, that's in the button event handler. And then we get the end thread function from the spawn thread, and then we get in button click post thread. So essentially it all works the way we'd expect it to. But if instead of using a message box we try and access the list box from the thread, and we simply add a message to the list box that says thank you for pushing the button, or we try to do that actually, and we save this code and run it. I'll move it down to be more centered and press the push me. You see we get the message box that says in button click pre-thread. When we click OK, the whole thing hangs up. We just get a exception that says cross-thread operation not valid. Control list box accessed from a thread other than the thread that it was created on. And if you want to see the code that actually creates this thread, which isn't obvious because we're dragging things to the form from the IDE and so on, if you look over in Solution Explorer, there's another CS file that's sort of hidden called form1.designer.cs, and if you double click on that, you'll see we have code that's much like the code we're using in ComWin, where we're specifying the actual list box control, and we have a thread which is then creating those controls, and has exclusive access to those controls. So that's form1designer.cs. Well, here's a second program with exactly the same controls, but if we look at the code behind it, we're doing several things different. For one thing, we're adding a delegate, which is called add list item, and creating a variable on that delegate called d_add list item. This actually just declares it. It's actually created in the form load, where we say d_add list item equals new add list item, and then this specifies, as all delegates do, a real method to be added to their list of real methods. And the real method basically just does what we want to do. It does the list box add items that says thank you for pushing the button, and then does a list box update. Not 100% sure you need the update, but it doesn't hurt. And the code in the button click event is pretty much identical. We create a thread by instantiating my thread on new thread with the specified thread function, and then we start the thread with a mythread.start. But in the thread function, what we do is actually instantiate an object on a new class called mythreadClass, and we pass a reference to the current form with the this keyword, and then we execute a method inside the class called run. And if we look at the mythread class, I have a form1 local variable called myFormControl1, and then in the constructor for the class I receive a reference to the form, and it says form1 myForm, which is the this that's passed to here, which gives you a handle to the original form. And then I set the local variable equal to this passed handle. So myFormControl1 becomes a reference to the main form. And then all I really have to do in the run function, which gets called second in the thread function, is do a form control1.invoke, which is one of the methods that's added in the other partial part of the IDE generated code, something that is given to us. We don't have to write it or anything. So I do an invoke, and I specify the delegate in form1, which is a reference to the function that actually updates the list box. So if we compile and run this and do the push me, we see that the thank you for pushing the button does appear in the list box, and we can do it all day. Of course, when we get down to the bottom, we'll get a scroll bar that starts showing our need to scroll up and down to see all the lines. But this is probably the main use you'll have for the UI and threads problem, and the main solution. So you might want to play this again and copy the source code in order to have a way of implementing that solution. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned a lot, and don't forget to subscribe.